Hey friends, we last left off reading Little Shaq chapter 1, and we left off with having read Slam Dunk with Little Shaq and Barry fighting over the broken game. Here's chapter 2 called The Game Plan. The game plan. All right, class, said Miss Turpenny. Settle down, please. Little Shaq took a seat at his desk near Barry and Walter. Rosa sat down next to Walter's twin sister, Aubrey. Little Shaq yawned. He had stayed up too late thinking about Barry and the broken video game. Miss Turpenny walked to the whiteboard. Can anyone tell me what we need to grow big and strong? She asked. Little Shaq raised his hand. Ooh, I know. Yes, Little Shaq, said Miss Turpenny. Food, he said. My mom says if I eat food that's good for me, I'll grow really tall. Your mom is right, said Miss Turpenny, and it looks like it's working. Little Shaq smiled. Food gives us energy, Miss Turpenny went on, and energy helps us grow. Do you know what else needs energy to grow? Rosa's hand shot up. Plants, said Rosa. They get energy from the sun. A plus, Rosa, said Mr. Penny. Plants also need air, soil, and water to grow, Mr. Penny continued. She walked over to the science table. Each group has 3 pots of soil, 2 packets of seeds, and 1 watering can, she said. We are going to plant our very own gardens. Cool, said the Skipple twins. Sometimes Walter and Aubrey thought exactly alike. Once a week, we'll write down how tall the plants get, said Mr. Penny. But you have to water them every morning or they won't grow at all. I'm really good at watering, said Barry. I water Nana Ruth's plants every afternoon. I'm really good at watering too, said Little Shaq. Mom has a garden out back. All of a sudden, Little Shaq had an idea. Hey, Barry, said Little Shaq. That's how we'll earn the money. What do you mean? Asked Barry. We're really good at watering, said Little Shack. I bet other people need their plants watered too. We'll start a business, said Barry. We'll call ourselves the O'Neill Green Team, said Little Shack. Barry thought for a moment and smiled. How about we work on the name together? It's a deal, said Little Shack. Later that afternoon, Mom and Dad and Nana Ruth agreed to their plan. Little Shack and Barry were officially in business. That Saturday, Barry and Little Shack loaded a red wagon with 2 watering cans. Their first house on the list belonged to Nana Ruth's friend, Mr. Witten. There was a rose garden in Mr. Witten's front yard. Hello there, boys, Mr. Witten called from his porch. He was having tea with Nana Ruth. Hi, Mr. Witten. Hi, Nana Ruth, said Little Shack. Give those roses a good drink, Nana Ruth replied. And be careful of the thorns, called Mr. Witten. Barry and Little Shack took out the watering cans and sprinkled the soil with water. It was so easy that Little Shack guessed they would earn the money for their new game in no time. Down the street, Mrs. Hobbs asked the boys to water the plants in her kitchen. Some of her plants were hanging high in the air. Little Shack reached up to water them. They were green and leafy. He wondered how Mrs. Hobbs ever watered them without him. Next door, Miss Emerson's sunroom was lined wall to wall with plants of all shapes and sizes. It was like a jungle. There were so many plants. Little Shack was afraid he might knock them over. Barry knew just what to do. Taking tiny steps, he squeezed down the rows, sprinkling the plants as he went. Barry even watered the prickly cactus all the way in the corner. Little Shack thought they made a good team. At the end of the block, Mr. Rodriguez had a great big vegetable garden. He grew all kinds of vegetables, like eggplant, corn, and zucchini, but his tomatoes were famous. Every summer, he'd mix them into a spicy salsa that he served at the neighborhood block party. It tasted so good. There was always a line to get some. Barry pushed the red wagon into Mr. Rodriguez's backyard. He was careful to steer it clear of the few muddy patches so the wheels wouldn't get stuck. Little Shack lifted the blue watering can. Mine is almost empty, he said. Mine too, Barry replied. Look, there's a hose. Good idea, said Little Shack. If you turn on the water, I'll fill the cans. Barry turned the round knob on the water tap. Little Shack waited, but nothing came out. Turn it again, said Little Shack. Barry turned the knob once more. Suddenly, a stream of water gushed out of the hose. Ah! Yelled Little Shack. He was soaking wet. The hose slipped out of his hands and snaked across the yard, spraying water everywhere. Shut it off, Barry, he yelled. Shut it off. Little Shack ran after the hose, but now the ground was covered in even more mud. His feet slipped and his legs scissored back and forth. The next thing he knew, he was toppling into the garden, knocking over plants left and right. Oh no! Little Shack yelled. Mr. Rodriguez's tomatoes! Barry turned off the water and hurried over to help. Are you okay, Little Shack? Barry's foot slipped too. He landed in a puddle of mud. Splat! Mr. Rodriguez came outside to see what all the noise was about. Barry and Little Shack were covered in mud from head to toe. I'm really sorry, Barry said. It was my fault. I turned the water on too strong. No, said Little Shack. It was my fault. I let go of the hose. Mr. Rodriguez smiled. It's all right, boys. Mr. Rodriguez picked up the hose. It looks like the nozzle was turned too high. It was my fault. But your garden, your tomato plants, said Little Shack. They're ruined. Well, let's see what we can do about that. Once Little Shack and Barry had cleaned up inside, they joined Mr. Rodriguez out in the garden. He showed them how to dig a hole and replant the tomatoes, packing the soil tight. When they had finished, the garden was good as new. Mr. Rodriguez told them that they had a career ahead of them. Little Shack liked the sound of that. He could see it now. O'Neill's gardening, watering and planting experts. Little Shack and Barry packed up their things and said thank you to Mr. Rodriguez. It was time to go home. All right, friends, that's the end of chapter 2. Stay tuned for chapter 3 coming soon.